Mr. Srinivasan has carved a niche in professional audio mastering systems such as Lake, LabGruppen, Midas, JBL, and Soundcraft. His career includes collaborations with legendary artists like Metallica, Roger Waters, and Elton John. In this session, Mr. Sudhakar will walk us through the essential concepts and advanced techniques of system design, measurement, and optimization. Mr. Srinivasan.
Hi, thank you for the... You guys can hear me? Face seems like it's slightly off. Okay, cool. Okay, so I'm Sudarshan. I have a company called LEWMINADIO. So we specialize in doing systems. We do, I have a couple of guys who work under me also. So we kind of support a lot of artists, support a lot of vendors, and support a lot of OEMs. When people need help, we go out and do systems for them. When the requirement is a little above, the feedback is killing me one second. So, as I was saying, so we do a lot of systems. Okay, so the reason I'm doing this topic is that the audio industry is vast, right? We have a lot of people doing a lot of things. Within audio, we have a lot of fields. There's film, there's recording, there's music, there's studio, there's so much more, right? And in live, we all think there's only one thing, right? Which is standing in front of a console and mixing for a band, which is the one thing that I want you guys to take away from here. There's more than that, right? If your heart lies there, then that's what you need to be doing. But if you want to look at another way of doing something within sound, then systems is something that is relatively unexplored, at least in the country. We don't have too many engineers who are doing a lot of stuff. So you would have heard from the panel before us. So we are just a handful of people in the country who are doing systems only, right? So what that means is that I don't mix. It's not that I don't want to. I used to mix at some point in my life, but then I chose to go into systems, right? And the reason behind it is, in case anybody wants me to talk in some other language in between, just let me know. I can kind of move. So the reason being that when you're young and you start off in a company, right? First thing that you want to do is get in front of the console, right? Everybody wants to do that, including me. I also wanted to do that. I did that for a while, and then I went to Dubai, and then I started from scratch because they didn't know who I was, right? And at that point in time, there were 3 other engineers who were more senior than me in the company, and to get a slot to stand in front of the mixer was kind of difficult. So they gave me odd jobs, and then there was one aspect that was not taken care of. Nobody took care of it. Like, we had 600 cabinets in the company, right? But the same 100 cabinets would go out every single show, right? And I looked at it and I said, what are we doing? Like, the other 500 are not used, right? There's a lot of fatigue that's being put into just the same cabinets. They're being run down. There's a lot of wear and tear on those cabinets. Those, compared to everything else, were not going out. And the boxes were not even numbered. So it's just the first box in the warehouse used to always go out, right? So the first thing I did was I set a number system. Every box had a number, every subwoofer had a number, and every show, alternate boxes had to go out, right? So if we're using 1 to 100, then 101 to 200 was the next show, and the next one, and the next one. So we tried to start off there. I didn't know there was something called systems back then, right? But then as I started taking care of all of these things, I understood, and they also understood, that there was a requirement for somebody to handle just the systems, right? So that's where I kind of grew into this field. And then I understood that there's a lot more to it, and I found this to be a lot more interesting than anything else. Because it's very different, it's very technical, and it's done before the show, and when the show starts, you can actually sit down and enjoy it, right? We don't have any work during the show. It's all before the show. So that was a good thing. So I started doing that, and I've been doing this for the last 25 years now. I've been doing just pure systems for 25 years. I've been doing this for 30 years now. I'm not that old, but I started really young. And so that's the journey. So what I'm going to talk about is the importance of measurement and optimization, right? Which is one of the most important things in a system. The most important important thing in systems is to how we deploy it, how we do the simulation beforehand, how we have a plan on how things are going to go up, at what height, how many speakers, what kind of speakers we need, what kind of fill speakers we need, out fills, in fills, front fills, subwoofer system, to make sure that particular show has the kind of target coverage that we're looking for, right, in terms of spectrum, right? A classical show has a very different frequency response that is required compared to something like rock and roll or EDM, right? So the kind of subwoofers that we spec for that, the amount of subwoofers that we spec for that is completely different. So that is step one. And once that's done, everything goes onto the field, and then we start putting things together. And once the system is up, then it's up to the system engineer to make sure every single box is at its maximum capacity. So to simplify the job is to make sure every seat in that venue gets more or less the same sound. Is it going to get the same sound? Never, right? It's never going to happen. It's very, very difficult to try and get that to happen. But if everybody has a similar sounding seat, then your job is done, right? Because we want everybody to hear the same things. We don't want you to hear the subwoofer a lot more than you, right? We all want to hear the same things everywhere. So that's where the job is. So let me get in, right? So the importance, why is it important now? So in the last couple of years, so let's say I've been doing this for a long time, and I've been doing this a long time with manufacturers, so we know how many boxes were sold into the country, right, to gear this entire market for this, the concert market basically, right? And we know how much the sale has increased from, say, 2010 until now. So in the last 15 years, we've seen a massive growth. But majority of that massive growth, maybe 70% of that growth, has happened post-COVID, right? Post-COVID, we are now seeing shows 3-4 times the size, right? An Indian artist before COVID used to get maybe 5,000 people, right? That was good. That was a good show. 5,000 people is packed, right? Today, we are seeing 20,000 on average. Yeah, I'm talking about A-list artists. And 20,000 is a big number. We've jumped massive amounts from 5,000 to 20,000, right? And if you talk about bigger artists, bigger Indian artists who have an international presence, like Diljit, for example, right? That's grown even more. Arjit, for another example, that's grown even more. Now the complexity comes in delivering this product to all of these big concerts, right? So the issue that we are faced with is that we have, the concerts are the same. The venue size is now exploded. The audience size is now exploded. So now we need, instead of us putting, 20 boxes in total, we're deploying 150 boxes minimum every single gig, right? So that comes with its own complexity. When we add more and more boxes, when we add more and more towers, when we add more and more arrays, we need to make sure they are all synchronous with each other, right? They all need to play together. If they don't, then we have a problem, right? So, which is why when we're looking at all of the new productions that are happening in the last couple of years, right? It's always, company A, company B, or company C that's doing the sound for them, right? But the market isn't like that. Everybody has a lot of equipment. The inventory is already there with people, right? Pune has a lot of inventory, for example, right? Hyderabad has a lot of inventory. Chennai has a lot of inventory. Bangalore has a lot of inventory. We don't require somebody to come down from Bombay to do that event. But we still are getting those people down. Why? Because the knowledge has not increased in all of these areas, right? So we need people to deploy better systems. We need people to do better things on field, right? So that everybody has a better experience. And when you do that, the company's portfolio is increasing. As the company's portfolio is increasing, people are not going to think twice to give you a big show, right? And it's slowly happening, right? If you look at regional players, big players regionally, they're all getting more and more events, right? So a good example is that in the South, all of the biggest shows happen in the South, by the way. Nothing compared to what happens here. Like, South has big artists, big shows, but the production somehow comes down from here for some reason, right? So it's not that we don't want that to happen. everybody's overburdened, right? The guys here are also doing shows. If they weren't going to do that show, they're going to do more shows here. And there's a lot of shows to go around, and it's only increasing more and more after COVID, right? So we need to gear up in order to better serve these markets, right? That's why I'm going to talk about, so this is all just general knowledge that I'm giving you, Gyan. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to get into a little more technical stuff, right? So just to give you an example, these are all the international artists that toured all over India in the last year. That's it, just 2024 season to 2025 season, right? Massive artist. Ed Sheeran did so many shows in India. In 2024, in the beginning of 20... Sorry, one second.
The session strategist for AV Active LED growth in India will begin shortly at AV Conference Hall.
It's very confusing. Okay, thank you.
All are requested to visit for
Okay, so this is just the amount of shows that happened. To give you an example, Ed Sheeran, when he came down in the beginning of 2024, did one show, and it was massive. Everybody spoke about it, right? It was like the biggest thing that ever happened. But then he came back the next year, or the end of that year, and did 7 more, right? So they are looking at us. The international market is 100% looking at us. Everybody wants to come down, do one show, or maybe get a sold out venue, stay back another day, do another show, like what Coldplay did, right? And this is just international artists. If you look at, this is an example of Indian artists now, right? So Anirudh, for example, packs easily 30,000 people every gig, right? And we have a lot of Indian artists who are getting international fame, right? And if you look at all of these shows, I mean, people who know who's done all of this, you know it's the same 2 companies, right? So this is what we need to change, right? We need more awareness in systems, basically, right? And once we get that, and when we figure out how we do things better, we're going to get more people to come in. We're going to get more companies that are going to do better stuff, and we're going to get regional guys also get a chance to do big things, right? Only when you do more things are you going to get better at it, right? So when it comes down to working on the field, right? Let's assume that you've got your system done, you have your simulations in order, you know what you've done, you have the right amount of boxes, flying at the right height, in the right space, and you have good coverage everywhere. What do you do when you get to the venue, right? Most people, and this is not just India, okay, this is internationally also, most people are omitting this part, which is what needs to happen on the ground, right? Today's simulation software is at a level where you can get most of this done beforehand, right? So take any big manufacturer, for example, take L-Acoustics, take JBL, take Meyer Sound, take D&B. You can put your arrays in, you can put your subwoofers in, you can put your fills in, you can time align everything there, you can make sure all of that is fine, right? But the problem with that is that there's not a problem. That's actually, they've made it for a certain reason. It's so that you can get the full picture when you're simulating, right? But it's not intended so that you take that, throw it into the field, and expect it to work, right? The difference being is that when you simulate in a software, you are simulating in the best scenario possible, right? You are not taking the room into consideration, you're not taking the floor into consideration, you're not taking anything into consideration, you're only taking the box and what that box can do, right? When we come on to ground reality, we have people making noise, we have stalls, we have barricades, we have floor, if we're indoor, then we have side walls, back walls, roof, ceiling, and it gets worse and worse, right? So it's good to get everything pre-planned. Like for example, let me give you an example. Let's say you have a main and a front fill, right? And you go into whichever simulation software and then you try to time align it, and your software is saying, okay, it's about 7 milliseconds, right? Just an example. So 7 milliseconds is what your software is giving you. It's a good number to start with, right? But that's not reality. Reality is going to be very different because your acoustic path lengths are different. The guy who built the scaffolding is not building it perfectly. When you say left array is 9 meters, right array is 9 meters, that's not the reality when you get on the ground. The ground might be slopey, right? The scaffolding might be crappy, right? One motor might have a problem and not go up fully. There could be n number of things that we do that can alter how the symmetry of a system is going to be. So we need to correct this on site, right? And that's what measurement and optimization is about. The first thing that we do is alignment, right? So what are we trying to do when we align? We have one source, we have a secondary source, and we try and get both of those sources aligned so that we can get a proper sum, right? And if we do this right, we get 6 dB summation. If we do this wrong, we get cancellation, right? And that's one aspect, which is power, right? I'm only talking about power right now, which is summation and cancellation. Now there is this second factor, which is more important than anything else when designing system, which is psychoacoustics, right? So let's say you have a front fill and your stage left, right? And you have a PA. You have PA left and right. Imagine if your front fill was, maybe 6 dB louder than your main PA, right? Then for the person who's standing right in front of the front fill, his sound is coming from the front fill. He's no longer looking at the stage, right? And this is the same problem when we deploy delay systems, right? If your delay system is only supposed to augment the main system, it's not supposed to be a separate system on its own. If it's a separate system on its own, everybody's brain is pointing them in the direction of the delay tower, which is not what we want to do. We want to keep everybody's eyes on the stage, which is where the action's happening, right? So there's something called Haas effect, which basically talks about how we can psychoacoustically center the attention into whichever point that we want to direct it to, right? I'm not going to go deep into Haas effect, but the point is that we can use Haas effect to our advantage. We have to design it in certain ways. So alignment is one thing. Power matching is another thing. So if we match everything properly, what we need the front fill to do is give us a little HF. That's it. We are losing presence because we are right in front of the subwoofers, right? So just to give you a small insight, right? Let's say we are in front of the front fill. Same scenario where stage left, right corner, we can hear the front fill right in front of us. So we can hear only that HF from that front fill alone. But the LF comes from everywhere, right? And the subwoofer frequency. So we are hearing one HF driver, but 32 subs, for example, right? So in your mind, that build-up is not correct because you don't have the same tonal balance anymore, right? So this is where I'm talking about, where we can't get granularity per seat level, but we, at least to make things easy, divide the venue into quadrants or different zones, right? And we make sure on an average that every zone is receiving the same tonal balance that the FOH is receiving. That's the fundamental thing that we're trying to do. FOH is always going to sound great, right? We want everything to sound as good as the FOH, right? So the alignment is one thing. And once we align, we have to make sure we also match the power, right? And most of the times, the number one thing that I hear, right, is that we don't have the time to do this. We never have the time to do this, right? The show is about to start, we don't have times, there isn't any much, nobody has the time, sound check is going to go on, so we need to just get everything running and start off immediately, right? That's okay, right? But if we try and do things, we start somewhere, and if we try and do things, we get faster and faster and faster and faster. People who've worked with me in this room know how fast I am, right? And that's not because, my fingers are really fast. I'm old, my fingers are slow, right? It's only because I keep doing it day in and day out. On an average, it's absurd, but on an average, I take 100 to 150 measurements every single show. Doesn't matter if it's a wedding, doesn't matter if it's a small auditorium, or doesn't matter if it's a massive venue, right? 100 to 150 measurements. And now you're thinking, oh, this guy must be doing systems one entire day. No, I take an hour to do this. That's it, right? And all of you can get there too. And the cliche thing is practice, right? That only makes us fast. It's not, we know what the mistakes are going to be if we keep practicing. We know how many measurements we need to take. And if you are in a scenario where you have no time at all, right? And I've done this too. You can get enough measurements, like 8 measurements across the entire venue, right? In under 10 minutes. That gives you a great perspective. Instead of you trying to walk around and do this, take the measurements, because your ears are lying to you all the time, right? You have no reference. When you walk from one place to another, you think you have a reference of how it's supposed to sound, but it's not. I mean, depending on what the brain tells the ear tells your brain and the brain tells yourself what it is, it changes from time to time. And because we don't want that to happen, we measure, right? When we measure, we have concrete evidence of how it sounds in that area. So as a small step, I would say, every venue, start with something simple. Do your alignment first, because that's the first thing that you need. Once all of your systems are talking to each other in a great way, right, then you're already there. Then you have something. You don't have multiple speakers. You have a system that is producing a sound together, right? And once that is done, then you start taking your measurements across different points, right? So start with 8 points, or start with 10 points, or start with even 4 points, right? Don't start with just that 1 point in FOH. It's going to sound great there. You don't need to take that point, right? So look at the other points that are a problem. If it's a 40-meter venue, for example, divide it into 4, right? Take 1 measurement every 4 meters. That's 4 measurements. That's simple, right? If you want to divide it, if you get really, really fast at it, then go a step further. Every 10 meters, take 2 measurements, right? If you get faster, 3 measurements, then 4 measurements, then 6, then 8. It's about you and how much data you want to analyze. The more data you have, the better it is. We're not always going to get good results, right? So coherence is a problem for us, right? And always when we're looking at traces and we're looking at coherence and we're saying, we try to act on something when we don't have good data. So taking multiple measurements at different locations will give you great coherence, right? And if it gives you great coherence, then you know that the body that you're working on is based on facts, right? So that's the first step. The second step is, once you have everything in place, then what you want to do is EQ it, right? Now, depending on what it is, I have a simple rule when it comes to EQ, right? I try not to boost at all. I try to cut, right? So if I have a waveform, so maybe if I have time, I'll try and wrap this up a little fast, and then I'll walk you through one of my measurements so it makes a little more sense to you guys. And then we can break it down and simplify it, right? And another rule of thumb that I have, if you overdo stuff, then we're going to have more problems, right? So I typically use 3 to 4 filters, parametric filters, that's it, on the system. That's all that is required, right? You can go, in the beginning, it's not going to be that simple. You can, use maybe 6, 8. Think of it like a console, right? A good console with a fully parametric, whatever, okay, I'm talking from the analog days. Everything is fully parametric now. So you always have 4 bands, LF, MF, then HF, and then HHF or whatever, right? So try and work within these 4 bands and just do that EQ. Don't do the EQ on the console if possible. I don't recommend it, because the reason is that, guy will come, change the show file, and then your EQ is gone. So you might as well do that EQ on the system wherever possible. Whichever system that you're working with today, in this day and age, has its own control software and has a way for you to do EQ, right? So you don't need an external DSP, just work with whatever you have. So once we EQ, then we've corrected the problem in the room, right? So for example, if the room has a lot of reflective walls, you're going to find HF buildup, right? So we need to bring that down in different areas. Now, if that room is really large, and if that volume of room is really, really big, the ceiling height is really high, then you're going to have LF buildup, right? and this is what you want to correct based on what you're trying to do and the room that you are in. Now, these are things that your simulation software can't tell you because it doesn't have your room data, right? Eventually, it will happen. That room data will be possible for us to get. Right now, we can build side walls easily, but eventually, in a couple of years, we will be able to build full venues fast and figure out what's happening in that room. But until that time happens, we still need to measure to figure out what's actually happening in that room, right? And once we're done with the EQ, actually, my slide's upside down. You should do array optimization first and then do EQ next, right? Because array optimization will, what is array optimization, right? Let me just simplify this for you. So you have a large venue, you have a massive array, right? Now the same problem is going to happen. Let's say you are dealing with a dual 15-inch line array system, right? So at any point in that venue, right, wherever you are, in that, let's assume that meter is 0 to 70 meters long, right? Anywhere in that venue, wherever you're standing, depending on which box is pointing to you, you're only hearing the MF from 2 to 3 boxes. You're hearing the HF from only one box, but you're hearing the LF from all boxes, right? So if you have 12 boxes, that's 24 15-inch drivers that's throwing at you at the same time. So this is where you have a problem, right? And this is all basic physics. This is called a Fresnel ring. That's been, the papers were out in the 1940s about this. And it's very simple because lower frequencies are not directional, right? So you hear all of the low frequencies and higher frequencies are directional. So you only hear some of the higher frequencies. So if we didn't do anything, then it would always sound like the system was bass heavy, right? Which is why we need to do array optimization. Sometimes array optimization is automatic, sometimes array optimization is manual, okay? A lot of companies build auto solvers, right? Things that can auto correct things for you, right? They are a great place to start, but they will not give you the best result all the time, okay? So you have to figure out if that's working out for you. Switch on optimization, walk across the room, see if it sounds actually better or worse. If you can, take measurements with and without optimization to figure out what's actually happening, because once you take that measurement, then you can sit in peace and figure out what's actually happening, right? So that's the other thing. So what's array optimization? So let's say we have a system that sounds like this, right? So on the left side is my lower frequencies, right side is higher frequencies, and we have a system that's sounding like this. But in reality, the gig that we're doing is, let's say, mainstream Bollywood, right? So in mainstream Bollywood, or anything that is commercial, we have a lot of low end, right? So we don't want the system to be flat. Nobody wants the system to be flat. This is the wrong idea that's been put into our heads from the very beginning. Only studio wants things flat. In live, flat is bad, right? What we want is always more low end and less HF. So we want a tilt in the system. The tilt being that on the lower end, we are higher, and on the higher end, we are lower. And that's what's pleasing to the ears, right? And you can try this out with a simple system. You can try this out with one box firing, 20, 30 feet and figure out what works for you. And it's always the system with the tilt that's going to sound better, right? So in this example, where let's say we're about 3 dB off the center line, right? But what we actually require for a Bollywood gig, right, is anywhere between 18 to 24 dB, right? So we need to optimize the system so that we have the right target trace to begin with, even before we start, optimizing and all of that. Because we have to get the components in those boxes to give us the right sound, right? And softwares do this automatically by doing whatever you want, right? So, for example, DNB does this per box with array processing, right? L-Acoustics can do this with a 2-box circuit or a 3-box circuit also, and it's called auto EQ, right? Beyond auto EQ, you can still go and manually change something like the LF response in a system, which is, L-Acoustics calls this zoom factor, right? And let me explain that to you, because I think they've kind of nailed it. It's the most simplest thing, right? So zoom, what is zoom factor? If you are going to zoom into me, right, I'm going to appear big, right? If you're going to zoom out, I'm going to appear small, right? So what zoom factor does is, if you want a small system to sound big, then you zoom in. And if you want a big system to sound small by tapering off the LF, then you zoom out. Simple, right? So that's what it is. I mean, it's confusing if nobody explains it to you, but this is what they're trying to achieve. And that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to get the tonal balance out. So if you're using Adamson, then they have something called tilt EQs that are built into all the presets. You can choose the tilt that you want. You can do a 3 dB tilt, a 2 dB tilt, or a 1 dB tilt, depending on what you want to do, right? If you don't have anything, you can still use shelving EQs to achieve whatever you want, right? But the right way to achieve the response is a box-to-box ratio, right? Let's say you have 12 tops and 6 subs. That's a 2:1 ratio, right? And at this point, if you feel you need more LF, say 6 dB more, right? If you need 6 dB more subs, then in theory, it's very simple. You need double the amount of subs. So what you need is not 2:1, but you need a 1:1 ratio. You need 12 tops, 12 subs. Then you have a 6 dB boost. You can't push something that's not there. Then you're just going to blow up drivers, right? So we all start with the system design. What are we designing for? What is the kind of show that we're designing for? And then put the subs and the tops based on what our requirement actually is, right? Cool. Any questions so far? No? Cool. So, so these are the omissions that we have, right? We are never taking the room into consideration when we're looking at simulation software, right? So this is something that you need to remember. This is why we need to measure outside. When we go outside, when we measure, say if I put a mic here and I measure it, I am figuring out what the system's response is at that area. Also, what effect does the wall have, the side walls have to that area over there? Do I need to tilt that array a little bit this side so that there's less spill on that wall, right? Or do I need to change the EQ a little bit just for the front portion, right? So these are things that we can figure out once we have that info. In order for us to have that info, we need to measure first, right? The second thing that doesn't come up is reflections, right? We are never looking at any reflection in a simulation software, which is why everything always looks great, but doesn't sound as good. And once we know where the reflections are coming out from, right? Maybe it's the back wall, right? Maybe it's the barricade, maybe it's the side wall, maybe there's a canopy right in front, right? Could be any number of things. But once you figure that out, then we know exactly what's happening, right? And I'll show you some examples of that also, right? So we're only looking at reflection as a simple thing, right? There's first order reflection, then there's second order reflection, then there's third order reflection, right? Then there's fourth order, and this keeps going, right? So if we look at an impulse response, okay, in measurement, an impulse response has all of the info that you always need, right? And we can always move from frequency domain to time domain, from time domain to frequency domain with an impulse response. It's the most powerful thing out there, right? So this is not a real impulse response, but it's a graphic to explain what it does, right? So in an impulse response, we're always going to see the direct sound being the loudest, right? And right after this, I'll move into an actual impulse response to show you that. And once we see that, we see all the reflections. So as the reflections keep coming down, right, they keep getting less in power because it's taking time. It has to travel that 50 meters and come back another 50 meters to where your mic position is. And this is all relative to one position, right? So if you were to move the mic somewhere else, this entire graph is going to look completely different, right? So by doing this in multiple points, we're also kind of figuring out where our major reflections are. We can't correct everything, right? But if we have 100 measurements and we average those measurements out, instead of us dealing with 50 reflections, we're now dealing with just 4 big ones. And if you solve those 4 big ones, The 4 big ones are your first order reflection. The big ones are always your first order reflection, right? And if you solve that first order reflection, then that first order reflection does not have the ability to create the second order reflection. And the second order does not have the ability to create the third order. So gradually we're decreasing the power of all the reflections, right? So overall the sound's getting better. So it's not that complex is what I'm trying to say, right? Another important factor is the environment, right? So in this scenario, we have a normal waveform, okay? And we're looking at a distance of 50 meters, temperature of 20, and humidity of 90%. Humidity is great for us, right? If we have more humidity, there's more HF that travels. If we have less humidity, there's very little HF that travels, okay? And that it's a drastic step. So if you look at this, it's the same reading, but the humidity is at 30% instead of 90%, right? So if you look at that circle on that frequency response graph, that's our corner frequency where we stop getting any HF, right? So that moves. Let me go back a slide. As you can see, that moves when the humidity moves. So we all have all of this built into simulation software, right? You take any software out there, it doesn't matter what it is. It can be sound vision, it can be ArrayCal, it can be venue synthesis, right? It can be map. All of it has an environment factor, right? I am 100% sure none of us use it, right? Including me. No. And the reason is if we don't give it the right input, we are not going to get the right output from the system. So what do we need to do? We need to figure out what the actual humidity and the temperature is at the venue and pass it on to the software so the software can predict the right thing and give it back to us. And we can do this only in the venue, right? Of course, we can predict with, weather app and all of that, but I find that it's not really helpful. Measuring then and there is helpful. Secondly, when are we doing the concert? You are measuring in the morning. The concert's in the evening, right? Humidity changes, sound completely changes. Your alignment changes, everything changes. So the best possible thing for us to do is to try and do this beforehand, right? If we have a day prior to the show, try and go there, figure out what the temperature and humidity is like, and put those inputs into the software if you want to. But if you can't, then do the measurements on that day. I mean, if you have the ability to take the measurements a day before, then do that, because that's going to be better, right? Which is what I typically do. Okay. So this is now another factor, which is distance, right? So at 0 dB difference, 0 meter distance, we have HF loss already, right? Now the environment factors here are not changing at all. So temperature remains 20, humidity remains at 50. The only thing that we're varying here is the distance. This is right in front of the speaker, and this is 50 meters behind, right? We have massive loss behind. And so there's no way we're going to get that system to sound the same if we don't optimize. You can do onboard optimization on the simulation software, but what I've seen in life is that if the simulation software tells you that right behind you're getting 6 dB less or 12 dB less, right? The truth is not that. The truth is half of it. You don't really get 12 dB less, you're getting only 6 dB less. You don't really get 6 dB less, you're getting only 3 dB less, right? So it's not actually that bad, because our environment factor that we've supposed to put into the software is not real, right? We're always working on 20 degrees and 50% humidity, which is not real scenario, depending on where we are. Like if you're in Bombay, brilliant, lot of humidity, right? But if you're in like the Deccan Plateau somewhere, then you're looking at 0% humidity. That means now you don't need a delay tower every 60 meters, you need a delay tower every 30 meters. So your design is wrong, right? And 30 to 60 meters, nobody's hearing any HF. So some things to consider. I've been told I have only 5 minutes left, so let me just see if I can pull out a real measurement. Sorry, you have to give it time. I should have switched on everything and kept it on. And this is another problem. It takes, okay, so my measurement folder, just for reference, is 7.8 GB, which is why it's taking that long to even load up the folders. This is what we call epic fail. I'm still waiting for the folders to load. Okay. Yeah, I could have done that manually. Okay. So this is a measurement spaced 20 meters apart, right? Not a measurement, but multiple measurements, an average of multiple measurements that's placed 20 meters apart, right? So let me just bring all of this up so you can see this better. So the yellow one's the 60-meter mark. The green one is the whatever that is, 20-meter mark, right? No, 40-meter mark, and the blue one's the 20-meter mark. So you can see that more or less in the LF region we're fine, but 1K and below where there's a lot of difference in the HF region, right? And this is what we're trying to correct. Secondly, if I now move into the impulse response, right? So we have a clean impulse response here. Sorry, no reflections. So, but you can see in this, if over here if we had multiple ripples, right? Let me show you something. Hold on. Give me a second. Okay, so here's a measurement of an average of the system. So now, if we look at this, we can look at this region. You guys can see my mouse, right? Yeah. So here we have a first reflection, second one, third one, fourth one, and then a little later, the fifth one, right? So how do we find out what it is? Now let's assume this is, it says this is 343. That's my starting impulse, right? So let's see the difference between this and this. So 343 minus, so let's call that roughly 40 milliseconds, right? So, sorry, I can't hear you. Which speaker? E15. Okay. This is, okay, just to give you a reference, this is 15 boxes of E15 flying at 17 meters high. So we know that the first reflection from this impulse is coming 40 milliseconds later. Roughly 1 millisecond is 0.9 feet. Okay, so let's just call it 1 millisecond 1 feet and simplify this, right? So we know our first reflection is coming 20 feet away, not 40, 20, because it takes time for it to go there and then come back to the microphone. So 20 feet from where that microphone was our first reflection. And in this particular scenario, there was a barricade, right? So an impulse gives us a lot of information that we need, right? And this is an average of those impulses. So if you look at this reading, right? So let me just clear this out and show you the individual readings. And now we can see those impulses spaced out, right? Because these readings are taken from different parts of that venue, right? And now, so we can synchronize all of those measurements together. So all we're doing is we're time aligning all of those measurements. And once we have this, now you look at the coherence here. Like we have really bad coherence throughout the venue, right? And so 100 measurements later, this is what we have. Better coherence, better data that we can work with, better things that we can do, right? So if you guys have any questions, just hit me up. I think my time's up. I think I've overstepped also, right? Okay, thank you.